Madam Speaker, of all the many policies that governments are called to deal with, these dealing with the lives and welfare of children are the most vulnerable group in our society, must be surely the most important that we can do. Children everywhere deserve a safe and secure home environment. However, it is a sad reality that in some countries, for a range of complex social, cultural or economic reasons, there are children unable to be cared for by their parents, extended families or anyone else, and who have no possibility of growing up in a family environment in their country of birth. For some of these children, inter-country adoption might be the only way in which they will have the opportunity to be a part of a secure and loving family and to have a better chance at a better life. Inter-country adoption is a complex and sensitive matter for all parties concerned, and a decision to remove a child from its country of birth and possibly in some instances from its birth parents is not one that the Australian government believes should ever be taken lightly. Nevertheless, we have and do support international adoption arrangements made under the Hague Convention on the Protection of Children and cooperation in respect of inter-country adoption, which has established safeguards to ensure that inter-country adoptions take place in the best interest of the child, and which offers eligible, caring families in Australia and elsewhere the opportunity to adopt an overseas-born child and provide that child with a family, a home and a future that he or she might never otherwise have had. Unfortunately, and for too long now, significant barriers have faced Australian families wanting to adopt from overseas. Inconsistent rules, high costs and lengthy waiting periods are common, so much so that they've been found to deter many people who would like to adopt a child from even starting the adoption process. In recognising that the process is required, bringing together those children from overseas who legitimately need a safe and loving home, and those Australians who dream of providing that home have been overburdened with inconsistency and complex red tape. The Prime Minister announced in December of last year that the government would simplify overseas adoption by the end of this year. At this point, Madam Speaker, I want to recognise the personal commitment to this issue by our Prime Minister. By removing those bureaucratic requirements and delays which serve little real purpose and benefit no one, but simply add to the complexity and costs faced by adopting families, the government wants to make it easier to adopt when such action is clearly agreed to by all parties to be in the best interest of the child. Australia's overarching requirement of any potential partner country willing to participate in inter-country adoption arrangements with us is that the country essentially meet ethical and legal framework standards and safeguards equivalent to those required under the Hague Convention to ensure that inter-country adoptions take place in the best interest of the child. In those cases where a country is not a signatory to the Convention but is seen to satisfactorily meet Convention standards, we see no reason why adoptions in that country should not be recognised in the same way as adoption in Convention countries. The changes proposed in this bill will therefore place children adopted by Australian citizens under bilateral arrangements in the same position as those adopted under Hague Convention arrangements. That is, they will be able to travel to Australia with their new families as Australian citizens on an Australian passport. Seeking as it does to reform the current procedural requirements and reduce unnecessary red tape, the Australian Citizenship Amendment Inter-Country Adoption Bill of 2014 is a positive step forward in delivering the government's promise. The key feature of the bill is an amendment which expands the scope of the existing Hague Convention provisions so as to include adoptions in accordance with bilateral arrangements. The decision-making framework remains the same. The amendments made by the bill will apply for the benefit of all children adopted under bilateral arrangements, whether the adoption was finalised before or after the amendments come into force. Madam Speaker, the government has clearly been delivering on its commitment to improve adoption procedures in other ways. A report by senior officials on options to reform overseas adoption, which was informed by public submission, has been considered. Improvements have already been announced to the process for families adopting children from Taiwan and South Korea, and a new overseas adoption program with South Africa has commenced. with a further 7 more programs in the pipeline. COAG has agreed in principle to a new national overseas adoption service from 2015, and options to reduce waiting times for visas for adoptive children from overseas are being developed. In addition, Madam Speaker, the government will introduce amendments to the Australian Citizenship Act so that obtaining Australian citizenship can happen in a child's country of origin, as well as addressing processing problems associated with the visa system. The Abbott government is clearly committed to adoption reform to enable more Australians who wish to adopt a child from overseas to achieve this wonderful outcome. Bringing together a child in need of a home, particularly a special needs child, as children of intercountry adoption so frequently are, with those who wish to offer a safe and loving family, is something that should be managed as sensitively and with as little unnecessary red tape as possible. Potential adoptee parents are required to go through an extremely complex and robust vetting process, and rightly so, but should not have to deal with any more red tape than is absolutely necessary. Madam Speaker, I strongly support and commend this bill to the House.